Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. It is Overwatch League kickoff week. The season starts in just 3 days. This Thursday we have the first matches of the 2022 season of the Overwatch League. And so I figured today is time to give you some of my predictions before we get into the season. Obviously Friday you got my Western Region Power Rankings. You got my APAC Power Rankings in a little bit, in a few kind of weeks, a week or two. When we get those matches kicking off. But today I wanted to do my preseason predictions. Just kind of shot in the dark predictions on what I think is going to happen in terms of who wins some of those big awards at the end of the season, like MVP, Rookie of the Year, and Coach of the Year, as well as giving some guesses for the Comeback Player of the Year, the Best New Home award, my award that I kind of I'm giving to a player who I think is going to have a large impact on a new team, as well as my prediction for which region will be stronger and my champion prediction. So that is what you can expect in this video. Last year I did some predictions on players who I thought I probably misjudged in the power rankings, and I definitely will probably talk about that in some capacity at some point, but because I haven't finished my power rankings for both regions yet, I don't want to jump to that yet. So maybe at the end of my APAC Power Rankings video, when that comes out here in a couple of weeks, I'll talk about that. But right now, we're going to jump into these predictions I have here. And we're going to start with that Best New Home award, if you will. This award is going to a player who I think is going to have the biggest impact on a new team. For last season, I gave it to Fury because I thought that Fury was an all-star level player going to a team that had a strong 2020 kind of end of their season, so I figured like you're adding star power to a roster that looked like it had some potential. That's the idea behind this award. And I am giving it for 2022. My prediction for who is going to be kind of that player is Smurf, of course, moving to the Seoul Dynasty. Tank was one of the roles that this team I felt like kind of had some issues with last season. They had consistency really in their DPS line with Prophet and Fitz, and I felt like generally speaking Onimo and Creative were a pretty solid support duo. But I never felt like their tank line really felt super well integrated, right? Gesture and Marvel worked at times, but Marvel didn't really play flex tank super well, and so you were wanting to see more Who Are You, or not Who Are You, why can't I think of his name right now? That's a mind blank. You wanted to see more, off tank play out of that team, but instead they were in, mostly double main tank players with the off tank role kind of being played, and so it felt like the Dynasty last season had some problems there with the tank role. And while Gesture was generally speaking pretty good, it didn't feel like the team really had it all together, and that was one of the problems that they had. But now with Smurf, that was his name, with Smurf on this team, I actually think this team has a much better tank line. I think that really boosts this team, and so they added some star power in other places, of course, with Stalker, and originally they added Jonak, but Jonak, of course, departed. So Smurf is really the big change to this team, and I'm a huge fan of Smurf. I think Smurf is a really good player. I think he brings a lot to this team, and he really is, for me, the difference maker that makes the Seoul Dynasty go from a, high level team last season to an elite level team potentially in 2022, really because of Smurf. And that is really for me why I have Smurf here in this kind of Best New Home award. I think that was a huge signing for the Seoul Dynasty. I'm super excited to see him on that team, and very interested to see how the team performs behind Smurf. Next, let's talk about who I think will win Comeback Player of the Year. And this is a very interesting award as well, and kind of thing to look at, because generally speaking, this is the award that you want to give to a player who had a bad year last season. And you kind of have to think about who's going to be a player that has a lot of impact on, that is a player who you didn't see much of last season or had a bad down year last season. And I think it's hard to kind of look at this player that I am going to name here and say that there's someone who makes sense for Comeback Player of the Year, because it's a player who we still look at very highly as kind of one of the top of their role, really good, solid player. But I'll give my reasoning for in a second, and that is, for me, Funny Astro. Yes, Funny Astro was an amazing player during his time in the Philadelphia Fusion. We didn't see much of him last season, didn't really get to play until the later part of the season, and when he did play, he looked good, but the Fusion themselves were not incredible, and so there is a very interesting kind of case to look at when it comes to Funny Astro, because the reality is he's a player who we still, like I said, feel very strongly about and still say is one of the top level main supports, is an incredible Lucio player. We know he's one of the best at the role and at the hero. But because his season was the way it was last season, you kind of have to ask the question of, well, what then would make him have to be a comeback player of the year? And to me, like, if he is in the conversation for top 3 main support in the Western region, if he's in the conversation for top 3 main support in the league, then he definitely would be comeback player of the year. If he's in the conversation, though, for top 3 in the Western region, right, when you have players like OG who's coming in who people think is going to be pretty good, you have players, of course, like Chorong who's coming in that people think very highly of, as well as you have players like Masa who have had success in the Overwatch League before. Flex support is an interesting, or support in general is an interesting role because there's a lot of teams that have not gotten a main support player, and so Funny Astro does have that to kind of work on as well. But he's also going to be potentially splitting time with Shu and Skewed. So to me, Funny Astro having to potentially come into this roster, and in my opinion, having to bench one of those players, and I think he will probably spend a lot of the time in the starting role because of how good he is. That's why I have him as comeback player of the year. I also consider giving it to Ance, because I think Ance is another very good player who has the potential to get that award for kind of a similar reason. He didn't play a lot of the time last season, and when he did, the Shock didn't look as great as they did. But if he's able to kind of reach that performance he did in 2020, you could definitely see Ance as one of those players as well. But Funny Astro, to me, is just the player I felt like has the most likely chance of getting it, because I think he is a player who had a somewhat down year last year and is on a team I feel very highly about, and so I think he is the one who's most likely to get the award this season. Speaking of the NA region, we've been talking about them a lot. For the stronger region, I do think the NA Western region will be stronger than the APAC region. That's a prediction I'm going to make here. Last season, I thought it would be the APAC region. I thought they just looked more competitive. It looked more kind of like there was less variety. There were fewer teams, but I felt like those teams were much closer together. Didn't really end up happening. It was really just Shanghai and then Chengdu were good, and they were generally beating Philly and Seoul, and then Philly and Seoul were competing with each other in New York occasionally, and Hangzhou occasionally, but generally speaking, the region was not very competitive. But in the Western region, it was really interesting last season, right? When you had Dallas at times be really good, and Houston was really good at the beginning of the year, and the Shock at their moments, but they kind of never really hit their peak, and Washington had those ups and those downs, and then you had this really interesting dynamic there in the Western region that made them very, very competitive. And I think going into the 2022 season, it seems that is going to be the case again. When you look at your teams like Dallas, like the Gladiators, like the Reign, like the Shock, like the Defiant, like the Outlaws, there seems to be these teams that really have the potential to be really close and really competitive. And so I think that really the Western region is hard to predict who's going to be really, really good. The APAC region, to me, feels a lot more clear-cut. Who's going to be towards the top, who's going to be in the middle, who's going to be at the bottom. But the Western region does not feel like that going into the season. So I do think that it is going to be a far more competitive region. I think it'll be really fun to watch the NA region. I'm super excited for the NA region this season. So my prediction is that the overall stronger region between the two will be the Western North American region. Next, let's talk about who I think will win Coach of the Year for 2022. And this is an interesting award, really, because I think the Coach of the Year is always going to go to someone who, or typically it's going to go to someone who's never won the award before. That's usually who wins it. And so when you look at the previous winners, who are Rush from last season and Moon from the season before, and while technically you could say that, technically Krusty has never won it, because he was someone who would have won in, say, 2019, when he was the best coach in the league by far. He's someone I also would kind of say is technically, like, in order for him to win it, the Shock would have to be the number one team in the region. And so I think that's very difficult for him potentially to get it. So my guess for Coach of the Year is going to be a Western region coach. I think there's a lot of potential candidates. Junkbuck could definitely be a potential candidate if the Houston Outlaws play well. Kooky if the NYXL play well. When you go to like the APAC region, if the Seoul Dynasty look pretty good, which is tough when you have a team like the Shanghai Dragons that have been really, really, really highly regarded, and most people still think they're going to be a really good team. It'll be difficult, but if the Seoul Dynasty look good, definitely potential for Toby to be someone that gets the award. But my prediction for who gets it is actually face of the LA Gladiators. And it really just comes down to the fact that I am really, really high on the Gladiators. I think the Gladiators look like an incredible team. I think they look like one of the top teams in the league right now. And so for me, I think they are going to get the Coach of the Year award for face, because I do think he does look generally to be in a good position to get it, just based on how good that team is. Usually the winner is a team that does very well. Maybe not always the best team, but one of the best teams is who wins Coach of the Year. Rookie of the Year. If you remember, I made a video a few weeks ago talking about my most exciting rookies for the 2022 season. And despite the fact that OG was my number one most exciting rookie going into 2022, I don't actually think he is going to be the Rookie of the Year. I think everybody's going to have the same Rookie of the Year prediction, by and large, but I just think there's really no one else to predict at this point, just considering what we know about him as a player and his success in contenders, and that's Proper. I think Proper is going to be Rookie of the Year. I think you have to expect him to win Rookie of the Year based on what we know about him, what we've seen from him in the past. He is just a player at another level of talented. Usually the player that people expect to be the best rookie in the season is not the best rookie in the season, or the player with the most hype surrounding them. You can go back to 2019, it was Decay. There was a bidding war for Decay. There was a whole story. In 2020, it was Sparkle, but he was too young, so he didn't really get the chance to shine in the same way. And then in 2021, it was all about Mag. But it's always kind of a player that is very hyped, but not the most hyped. Right? Like Hawksall was really hyped going into 2019, and he won the award. He wasn't the most hyped, but he was very hyped. Alarm was very hyped going into 2020. Wasn't the most hyped, but was very hyped. He got the award. Pelican was very hyped in 2021. Wasn't the most hyped, got the award. So Proper is the most hyped. So I think the chances of him getting the award are actually kind of not in his favor, because he has to essentially be the next coming of Prophet. He has to basically be the greatest player of all time, I think, to win the award, because the expectations for him are that high. So you have a player, in my opinion, like Patifon, or a player who else is pretty exciting, like Charong, right? These players who have a lot of hype behind them, but maybe not as much hype behind them, are the ones who I think are in a better position to try to get the award. But I think Proper, even if he is just elite, will get the award, because he is so highly regarded, and people will want to see him get the award because of that. My MVP prediction for 2022 is someone who arguably was the MVP last year, and also there was a case to be made for him to be MVP back in 2020, and I think 2022 is probably the year he finally gets the award, and that is Lip of the Shanghai Dragons. I think it's pretty likely the Shanghai Dragons are one of the best teams again this year. They still look to be one of the most well-built and well-rounded teams in 2022, and so I would say there's a pretty decent chance that Lip is a part of the, a big part of that team's success, assuming that they are as successful as you think they're going to be. And so I think Lip is going to be the guy who wins that MVP award. DPS seems to be the way forward, and I think Lip has kind of cemented himself as one of the most elite DPS players in the league. And so I'd say his chances of winning the MVP award are pretty high. And so that's my prediction. It's a pretty safe prediction, I think, but he is the guy I think will ultimately take the award home this season. The final prediction is who I think is going to win the 2022 season of the Overwatch League. Now, I haven't done a full kind of power ranking where I have the entire 20 teams in it, but this is the team that will be number one when those power rankings come out in a couple of weeks. So a little spoiler, it'll spoil also my APAC power rankings, because this is the team that'll obviously be number one in the APAC power rankings. But I think that the Shanghai Dragons are going to repeat as Overwatch League champions in 2022. I think their roster is way too well built. It's too well rounded. I think that they really don't have any major obstacles in their region. I think essentially, if you're the Shanghai Dragons, you are looking at a region that is very winnable because there's not really a team that I think rivals them in the APAC region, except for maybe the Seoul Dynasty or the Philadelphia Fusion, if they're playing at their best. Chengdu, I would have maybe put in that category until they had those changes that they made. But generally speaking, I don't think there's many teams in their region that challenge them, which means that they technically could have a harder road ahead of them when they get to the kind of playoffs because they haven't faced off against some of these Western region teams. But that didn't really slow them down much last season. They obviously got playtime against Dallas and the Gladiators and the Reign in 2021, but prior to the playoffs. But I still think that they are generally the best built and most well-rounded team in the league, and so I think it would be a surprise if they don't repeat. Or I would be surprised if they're not in the conversation when the playoffs rolls around as one of the favorites to win the whole thing, because I think they're just too well built. And I think they've just gotten better every year. And so despite the fact they made very few changes to their roster, I still think they look like one of the best teams going into 2022. And I think they are going to repeat because they've been there once before. And that to me is something I have a lot of faith in for them to be able to do it again. So there you go. There's some of my preseason predictions on some different things. Just things I figured I would throw out there. Things that are kind of storylines I'll be following this season. Things that I find interesting. Let me know your thoughts on any of these predictions in the comments down below. If you agree with me on any of them, if you disagree with me on any of them, if there's a prediction I didn't make that you would have liked to see me make, leave it in the comments, and maybe I'll reply with an interesting kind of response, or just a response in general to your question or prediction that you wish I would have made. And yeah, so that's that. Hope you'll enjoy the video. If you like it, consider liking and subscribing for more like it in the future. That's going to be all from me for today. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.